getting started, and we realized that we would not be able to do any in-person events. An interesting thing what we had also done was in February 2020, we had created domain-specific tracks in our chapter. So, for instance, agri-tech, fintech, edtech, data science, design, core engineering, and also 2 tracks which are open to all our ITB alum, who especially who are in Bangalore chapter, which is the cultural and the sports tracks. So currently these are restricted to IITB alum who are in Bangalore, but maybe in future we may probably also, reach out to other alumni in other cities. One more thing I wanted to share was that we also have built a very strong alum network, in Bangalore. So a lot of you, I can see, from the registrations that you're already part of the Bangalore chapter. In case you are not, please feel free to reach out to me. You can go to the Bangalore chapter website or, to any of your friends through Kunal, if you know. So feel free to reach out to me or to any of us. So you can actually get connected because, it's a pleasure now that, Bangalore chapter will become one of the largest globally one of the largest, alum networks, because we connected about 1,200 alumni on WhatsApp groups and on our Telegram group. So you're most welcome to join. Also, I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to share about some very good initiatives that we've been doing beyond Bangalore. So we started actually updating our database August 2020 onwards. And in October 20, we realized that there was a vacuum in other cities or, in India. And therefore, we started some new networks, alum networks in Kerala, in Lucknow. In Karnataka, I found there was only a Bangalore chapter, which is very active and, which is a strong network. So we also started the Hubli, Dharwad and the Mysuru alum networks. In case you have any friends who are in any of these cities or in any of these states, please feel free to reach out to us. We would be happy to connect because especially we realized we are being able to leverage the power of this network, in Corona times. Because when people are asking a few days back, they wanted some help, someone wanted help in Lucknow, or, a non-alum, actually a person who's working nice in Dhanbad, his family was struck with Corona. So we could actually, make those connects. So this is our request. If you have any friends, please feel free to reach out to us. Another interesting thing which happened in late January 2021, we also realized that there was a vacuum in terms of alum networks in Europe, except for London. So we've also created some new alum networks in some countries in Europe, and we just started alum networks in Nordic countries, Netherlands. So we combined, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. So we created Benelux. Germany has actually grown very fast. We already connected about 80 alum in Germany. So it's actually been a very interesting journey. So my one request also is if anyone of you would like to volunteer with us, because we're a volunteer-driven organization. Each one of us, Kunal, he's been very proactive in the startups track. So if you are in Bangalore, if you're in the other chapter, please get in touch with your EC members in that particular chapter. And so you're most welcome, to come into the the chapter leaders. You can also aspire to be chapter leaders, be part of the executive committee of your chapters. So that is about, the chapter. Also, if you have any friends you would like to connect, let's say if you're staying in Pune or in Mumbai, so we are connected actually strongly across chapters. So you can reach out to any of us if you know, again, like if you know Pratik or Kunal or me, anyone, Shay, so get you connected to your, particular chapter. So also to just let you know that we have 20 chapters in India and in the rest of the world. The rest of the world excludes North America. So excluding North America, we have 20 chapters in India and in the rest of the world. So always get connected to your local chapters. That's all actually from my side. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the event. Thank you, Kunal.
Thanks so much, Smita, for the introduction. Before we get started, why don't we do this? Let's just go through a quick 30-second introduction from each of them. We can get started. Maybe I'll throw the ball to Pratik first.
Okay, I'll start first. I'm Pratik graduated comp science, IT Bombay, to an N badge. Been working at Nexus Venture Partners since last 6 years. Prior to this, I was an entrepreneur, built a social commerce company, built a content marketing company. Both of them did not work out. Prior to that, I worked at Blackstone Private Equity and Morgan Stanley Quant Group. Nexus is a 16-year-old fund. We manage about $1.6 billion of assets. First investors in Postman, Dhruva, Unacademy, Quizzes, Newton School, Whitehead Junior, and so on. Very excited to be here and very excited to learn from all the entrepreneurs here.
Excellent. Mihir Shrey?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Hi everyone. So Mihir here. I'm a mechanical engineering DD 2010 to 15. Spent most of my time in core tech activities back at campus. So if for some of the young people, you might be familiar with the AUV team or the autonomous underwater vehicle team. So spent almost 4 years on that. Started my career with McKinsey, was part of their supply chain practice for about 3.5 years, mostly working in Southeast Asia and a bit in India. Post that was part of OYO, part of their expansion journey, again in Malaysia, leading revenue and profitability for them. Lastly, was working for a fintech startup called Open Financial or Bank Open, leading their lending and wealth businesses before I started Teachment with 3 other co-founders last year. Out of the 4 of us, 3 of us are from IIT Bombay. So there is Anshuman, who is 2016 aerospace batch, and then there is Divyansh, who is also who's a metallurgical DD 2011 to 16. So yeah, that's my background. At Teachment, we are an online teaching platform on way to become the default teacher app for any teacher who wants to digitize their classrooms, take live online classes, take assessments, automate their workflows, etc., etc.
Excellent.
Hi everyone. First of all, thanks to the IIT Bombay Alumni Association for inviting. Thanks for that. My name is Shrey. I'm an electrical engineering graduate from 2012 to 2016. I founded Mastery along with my co-founder Royal. He's also an IIT Bombay graduate, computer science. So Mastery is an online communication platform specifically for kids, but more targeted towards international markets and tier 1 audience. And in terms of, so we are a personalized live learning classes platform. We are also working a lot towards our distribution, etc. On those elements these days. Before Mastery, I was working with Bloom. So my stint with EdTech is kind of a little longer than just Mastery, because at Bloom Ventures, I was looking at education space very closely. So it's been almost about 2.5, 3 years in EdTech. And before that, I did a brief management consulting stint. And before that, I did start up a company right from college, which goes by the name Soundrex. The other 2 co-founders are actually both IIT Bombay, a year senior to me. They're now building Rephrase.ai, which is again a super cool platform. So yeah, great.
Thanks, Ray. We had one more panelist, but who could not join due to unforeseen circumstances. But we have a great lineup for today anyway. Why don't we get started, right? I think my first question is directed towards Pratik. And Pratik, you've been the longest in the ecosystem for about 6-7 years. And EdTech has come a long way since 2015, right? Where there was about $150-200 million of investment, and now the number has gone up 10x to about $2.5 billion. Now, I just want to explore with you, how has this ecosystem evolved? How have the startups evolved and the founders evolved, right? You would have seen different waves of startups come in, and you might have also invested in some. Just want to get your views on that.
No, that's a very question. I distinctly remember 8-9 years back thinking about ideas for my startup. We would actually discuss that EdTech is not the right. It's impossible teachers' behavior, and we'll say, hey, everything is available for free. Why would anyone ever pay for content? Content is very easy to copy, etc. It's amazing that 8-9 years back, EdTech was seen as a dead place. From as an entrepreneur, it's just very, very difficult to even have any breakthrough. but today lots of interesting companies have been created, and lots are on their way. I think the fundamental reason for why that happened was that, well, in general, the penetration was increasing, internet penetration was increasing, payment penetration was increasing, so people were willing to pay more. But more importantly, I think the supply of teachers got created, which were creating very, very high quality content online. And 7 8 years back, teachers did not know how to create content online, and so the offline experience was always better. But over time, some people learned about it, and the ecosystem then started growing, and then the platforms grew, where platforms then started getting higher quality teachers visible, and then students learned that online is better, etc. And so the ecosystem evolved faster than we had imagined. And last year, of course, changed the ecosystem completely, because everyone was forced to try it out, and then people realized that, hey, it's not bad, it's actually good, and it's actually more efficient. I think everything has changed in the last 8 9 years, and it's amazing to me that like I especially say that about Teachment, that Teachment assumes that teachers will be able to teach online, and they'll be able to get following. It's actually beautiful that 8 9 years back we could not even imagine that something like this would happen, because there were no high quality teachers teaching online. There was no one willing to learn online, and now everything has changed. And that's why interesting companies are being created now than they were being created earlier.
Got it. It's very similar. My experience is very similar. When I joined VC, a lot of what I heard in the market was that edtech, no one has made any money in the edtech, and now all the money is in the edtech. Right? No, just want to pass it to Shrey. Shrey, you've also been in the edtech ecosystem for about 3.5 years. So, what are your views? As an investor and now as an entrepreneur, how have you seen things change?
I don't think that things have changed, to be honest, too much. I think fundamentally, of course, there was a wave of growth of internet penetration, because of which more and more users sort of got online and could do things. But I think ultimately, if you look at the quality offerings, etc., have grown a lot from 2014. If you look at the two largest players, fundamentally what they've cracked is distribution, right? So I mean, edtech fundamentally is a very, if you want to build a big business, you have to crack distribution. And you look at Byju's, they built offline distribution. You look at Unacademy, they built the YouTube distribution, right? All the companies which are even now also growing very, very fast, either they have cracked a particular channel which solves for that. I think so. Therefore, from that perspective, I would say founders who've really focused on distribution have really grown very fast overall. But I think from a overall ecosystem perspective, I would say that I think COVID has kind of accelerated it by 2-3 years. We would have already gotten to this place, but maybe say in 5 years, 7 years, what was to be done will now be done in 2-3 years. So it has both the sides for startups, right? It's a good and a bad both. Yeah.
Got it. Interesting. I just want to twist the question a little bit for Mihir. Mihir, as you're saying, your background was not in edtech, right? You were with the fintech. Before that, you were with Oyo, and your startup is one of the youngest of the lot. So, what made you start up in edtech? What did you see happening last March that you just decided, let's leave everything, start Teachment?
Yeah. So Kunal, like you're familiar, right? So we are a team that had been talking to each other for many years now. So we have been problem solving on a lot of ideas. And initially we never focused on edtech as such, right? It was more a number of ideas coming to head, exploring every idea, looking at things from first principles. And you were never able to kind of build conviction on anything to do that way, right? So finally, what we realized was that we had this unfair advantage that one of the co-founders, Payoj, he comes from education background. So he has been running his family's CBSE school for the last 10-11 years in a remote place, and he has seen education very closely. So we realized that we have this advantage that we have a lot of insights on how education is happening. So we started focusing on education. So this is when, back in 2019, that was the time when I left my job at Oyo, moved to Bangalore. The idea was to start up. Payoj moved from the US. Divyansh was in that phase that he was about to leave Swiggy. So we started on something else in edtech. If you remember, this was the time when we had that meetup in Koramangala of the IITBAA. Yeah. And we were working on extracurricular activities for kids, right? So what we were working on was going somewhere in the lines of, let's say, Cult for Kids, where we were going around societies, trying to create events for kids where they can come and explore activities. And we realized that over time this was something very, very difficult to scale, right? Pretty much brick and mortar idea. And after a few months, we decided to put a pause to it, ended up taking jobs at different places. And then kind of over the months, you zoom into Feb, March last year, when COVID started happening. The entire country was facing lockdown, and this is where we realized that every teacher that we knew, right, whether it be our own school teachers, whether it be university teachers, tuition teachers, coaching teachers, everyone was struggling to teach online. And when you dig deeper into it, you realize that there has been very limited productization that has been done for an online teaching use case. So teachers were essentially taking their live classes on solutions meant for business meetings like Zoom, Google Meets. They were even, for example, teachers conducting live classes on Facebook Live, because you get a much better quality of video there. Teachers were managing their content on an open platform like YouTube, managing communications on WhatsApp, taking examinations on Google Forms. So it was a nightmare, right? So a very sophisticated tech savvy teacher can still manage all of this, but it's not sustainable to operate in such a manner. So this is how we came together, that when you look back at it, a tool meant for online teaching, now it's kind of, you look back at it and say, how did it not exist so far, right? So this is how we started, that can we come up with a solution that solves 70-80% of these teachers' problem, and came up with an application, an APK, where teachers could create classrooms, take live classes in a controlled manner.
Got it. No, I still remember discussing Cult for Kids idea in that Koramangala meetup that we had. Good that you finally started with Teachment. Now, speaking of COVID, and while we were all hoping that COVID will go away, but now it's kind of deja vu, right? What happened in last March is happening again, and it's much worse. But a question that I'm sure a lot of investors ask you, so I'm going to start with the entrepreneurs first, is that what after COVID, right? What do you see the landscape looking like after COVID? Will teachers still, will students still want to do online classes? Is it an offline better? There's many arguments, pros and cons for it. I won't get into it, but just want to get your views on how you think your business models will evolve, your own business models. And second, how do you think the parents and students will change their responses after COVID?
Should I take that up?
Yeah, please, either Nilesh, right?
Yeah. So Kunal, broadly, what we have seen is that there are three factors that kind of happened almost simultaneously or in sequence with each other, right? So number one was smartphone penetration in India. Number two was internet connectivity, 4G connectivity, thanks to Jio, that can support live classes, live streaming, etc. And third was COVID, right? So all these three factors combined together created a very unique, I would say, situation. So you can look at it and say that this is more or less like the e-commerce moment that happened for retail 10 or 11 years back, when there were options to kind of sell on Amazon, Flipkart, Snapdeal, and other options. And for retailers or sellers, they had kind of that choice, right? That I can start selling online. I can maybe sell in blend, try some online, continue my offline business. And then there was a large majority that kind of continued offline, now gradually adopting online, and a big majority that never really adopted it, right? So what has happened is that over the last 1 year, it has kind of translated into this e-commerce moment for EdTech, where that use case has been proven out. So to all the teachers out there, they have taken a live class in some form or the other. All the students have attended a live class in some form or the other. And now you know that teaching and learning can happen in this mechanism. So there were always some I would say early adopters or innovators, right? That kind of adopted this before tech was there. So I remember when I was preparing for JEE 2007, 2008, there was this one odd teacher in Bhopal who used to kind of have a broadband connection at his home. 4 of us used to attend his offline class, and then there were 2 individuals sitting in different places in India attending his live classes online. So this was back in 2007-8. So these were like innovators adopting technology really early, and over the past few years, we have seen some early adopters coming in big numbers and adopting the technology. And going forward, there will be a very slow and gradual curve of this getting kind of institutionalized in the way teachers teach and students learn. So that's how we see it.
Got it. Shrey, any reactions?
Yeah, sure. So I think I'll answer that question in 2 parts, right? One is the macro aspect and one is the micro aspect, right? So I think from a macro perspective, yes, if you're going to ask that whether there will be a sort of pushback when you go, sort of some, let's say offline institutes open up, etc. It's not like that offline business is going to die, right? Because people are going to go back there. But I think the question has to be put in context of which market, right? Are you pre-K? Are you K-12? Are you doing test prep? Are you doing, higher learning, etc.? So it really matters. At a micro level, I would go and ask, basically, typically at tech, what I've seen across is solves for either one of those three things, right? Or a combination of two: quality, accessibility, or convenience, right? So if your startup kind of solves for either one of these aspects, right? But let's say if it's convenience, then you would be more worried about COVID. But for example, let's say if it solves for accessibility, someone is getting a great educator who has not been able to promise around you, right? So I think the fundamental question that I would ask, and the way that I would respond, especially from a context of say mastery, is that I think what is the inherent mode that you're creating, right? And are you able to create such a brand value? Are you able to provide that kind of value to the customers around your platform, right? And I think if the user feels, I think it's a very simple question. You can just cohortize your users basis that, and if say 60-80% of the users are still going to stick to your platform, then you are going to survive, right? I think that's primarily how I would look at it and answer it.
Got it. No, the accessibility part is very true, because I've met a lot of entrepreneurs who said that the girl participation in their classes has gone up dramatically just because it's online now, which earlier was very prohibitive for them to attend. Prateek, what are your views on this? Given you come from a different investor mindset, any views?
Yeah, well, I completely agree with Shay and Mihir. In my mind, because most of the tech companies are creating value beyond convenience. This is just a forced experiment on us, because of which all of us are learning that this works. And like Shay mentioned, it has just, we were anyway supposed to reach here 3-4 years from now. We perhaps reached here faster, and nothing else has changed. So I would never ask this question that what would happen after COVID for most of the companies. Of course, in case of convenience, where the value is more convenience, it would be a question. But there as well, if the founder knows the end goal, then it will be a solvable problem. So I will not worry about when COVID ends, then what would happen to these companies.
Got it. No, that makes sense. No, I just want to take a step back, right? And let's just look at the whole education system as a whole. The promise of EdTech is that it'll ultimately change learning outcomes, right? But my question is, given that you guys have more years on the ground, is that really happening, or is it really moving just the existing offline system that you have, which is that there are many flaws to it? Is it just moving that system online? Is tech really changing the outcomes for students? Because that's really what matters in the end, right? Doesn't matter, what revenue you have or what numbers you get at the test. It's really, are kids getting better education? Maybe I'll start with the entrepreneurs first. Any views on that? Maybe you've heard from your students, your teachers.
Sure, I'll take this up. So I think so from a perspective of what I have seen, I think it's also dependent on what you do, right? And again, it's not just about kids, right? Like, do adults feel, do test like competitive spaces, like do they feel that whether it's valuable enough or not, right? And I think you look at the entire spectrum, right? Every product is built from a different problem perspective, right? So for example, if I'm going to like a 4 or 5 year old, I'm not going to solve for learning outcome. I'm going to solve for engagement, right? Because that's what the kid really wants, right? You want the kid to be like sitting across, looking at a screen and be able to sit through a lecture or say like a particular content that you're doing. And that's are more like that, right? So I think it really depends on are you solving for, actual learning outcome, right? So I think because ultimately the learning outcome is a combination of what you learn plus what your motivation levels are, right? Because it's an education problem. So we've all been through that thing, right? Because motivation is a bigger problem to solve in education when it comes to early age segment. Now, I think when I look at from a mastery perspective, what I think we've been able to do well is that, for example, when a kid comes, right, like they are absolutely glued to the screen. They do not want to leave the screen. I think if you can solve that problem, that means that you've solved for motivation, right? Now, of course, when you look at learning outcomes, you can look at it in two terms, right? Do you want to justify it to the parent, or are you actually asking whether those learning outcomes are being met, right? Again, those can be divided into short term and long term. So that's basically just to summarize, right? I think there have been a lot of people, especially when you go skill based, you see those outcomes in more strongly. For example, if your promise is marks, then it comes in longer cycles. So edtech is just what is your cycle of effect? That's the real question to ask, right? You could be preparing for a 2-year, 3-year exam. You can say, what are the outcomes? The outcomes are only going to come when they appear for the exam, right? So it's about that. What is the end goal that people are coming for you, like to you for?
Got it. No, that makes sense. I think it's important to divide it into subparts as you did, right? And another subpart of this question is, right, the way edtech is sold in India, there's a lot of noise around good and bad things that people are doing, right? And I just want to get your views regarding, because there's a lot of FOMO creation that is done among parents to sell edtech products. And while, at some extent, you have to do dhanda, but how do you think that should change going forward in the market? Because from a parent's perspective, it's just so much noise, right? I spoke to a lot of parents from diligence, and they're like, ye call karta hai, wo call karta hai, sab same cheez bolte hain. And it's very hard for them to discern where they will get real value and so on. What are you thinking in terms of the philosophy of building your company? And maybe I'll get to Pratik first, given his association with many of the large companies in this space.
Sure. So I'll first answer the previous question, which Shay gave a good answer to. And in my mind, it has only been 5-6 years since a lot of these companies have started, and we are just scratching the surface in terms of what disruptive value they can create. So today, of course, they are creating disruptive value in creating accessibility, creating affordability, which did not exist earlier, and hence they should be applauded for it. I think a lot of these companies have created great value. However, the big value will be created over time once distribution has been reached and scale has been reached. Because so in my mind, peer-to-peer learning could not have happened offline as well that can happen online. Project-based learning could not have happened as well offline that can happen online now. So a lot of new ways of education will come up, and of course the leaders will show us the way in how those things can happen, and that will be disruptive value creation. Today, let's be honest, we are just scratching the surface, and the first problem that needed to be solved was to show people that value is there and come online. I think we are just scratching the surface. So that's that. Second, around FOMO creation and mis-selling, I think it's just an evolution of the ecosystem. It has happened in all spaces. It's not tech or not technology is not the first place where it has happened. Over time, people are realizing what is the importance of different products. Over time, there will be more clarity. Over time, there will be word of mouth, and the right companies will emerge as winners in the long term. Short term, there will be a lot of noise, and it's okay. In the larger scheme of things, it does not move the needle as much. So I will not be as worried about it. Some of it is FOMO, some of it is mis-selling, but a lot of it is also more positioning than anything else. In my mind, if FOMO helps you get comfort and get assurance that someone is learning, I think that I'm paying for that comfort, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the other argument. And of course, the primary argument is over time, these companies will be able to prove value that yes, your kid has learned, and yes, your kid has built this because of this, or done well in life because of this course, and that will be the true testament and true proof point of everything that people are selling.
Got it.
You'll not be able to fake for a long time, and everyone knows that. So there's no counter argument to this. In 5-6 years, it will all be clear very soon.
Got it. No, education is a space where word of mouth is very, very strong, right? And if you're doing something wrong, people will figure out in a matter of months. So if you're doing something wrong, you won't stay in the business for long. Any reactions, Shay, Mihir?
Yeah, so broadly, Kunal, on both of these questions, right? So on learning outcomes, so I think I'll answer more from an infra perspective, because our company is actually on the infra side on building infra for these live classes. Now, there is a very long way to go, right? So frankly, when we think about our platform, the way we think about it is that step one is that how do you make an online class, let's say, as interactive as an offline class, right? How do you bridge that gap? of let's say things that can be done in an offline class but not happening in an online class. So step one, level one. So obviously, even the state of technology right now, there are a number of things where online is better, but at a very macro level, right? Level one is bridging that gap. And level two is that how do you take it to the next level, that ultimately a kid would enjoy a live class or an online class much more because of n number of things that cannot be done in an offline class, right? So that is where I think there is a very long way to go in the core infra itself that needs to be developed for these classes. Some of the glimpses of how this can look are coming out from China, where there are some platforms where if you look at it, the level of interactability in these platforms, in these classes is to the next level, right? But if you talk about globally as such, not just in India, this live teaching tech is just evolving. It's just starting to evolve, right? So like we started in India, there are a number of companies that started in the US that have just started building this tech for live classes. So there is a very long way to go. But what is definitely true is that a live class 6 months from now or 12 months from now, 2 years from now will look very, very different from the way they look at they look right now, right? So that's more on the learning outcomes, and tech has a very big role to play in it. And secondly, on the hard selling part, right? So this is where what we are seeing on the platform, since this is a slightly different model in which EdTech is happening on the platform, students as such are getting acquired in very different ways. So since the platform is more of a teacher-led solution, let's say a very common way in which teachers acquire these students is purely word of mouth, right? Because these teachers have their own brands in their own different regions. They are known for a very, let's say, if I talk about Bhopal, right? In Bhopal, there would be a teacher that is known for, let's say, 10th grade, 12th grade MP board examinations. Now, this teacher would already have a brand in the neighboring 2 to 3 districts that this is a teacher to go to for your board examinations if you are in MP board, right? Now, through the platform, what these teachers are able to do now is, number one, address a much larger student base. So these students, now they get to know that, yeah, wo teacher the, he's now online, this is the link to join his classes. So that has become so seamless. These teachers are able to kind of reduce their cost very significantly. So what is happening is that the offline courses of the same teachers versus the online courses, they are 30 to 40% discounted. Because a teacher, for them, the incremental cost is very, very low, right? So affordability to students is significantly expanding, and the efficiency, not to say the efficiency, right? If you are able to run 3 batches now, you can run 6 batches because so much of your workflow has got automated. So this is how we are seeing that the acquisition happening, at least on the way we are seeing on the platform, and teacher-led models is very, very different.
Got it. That's very interesting to see. I think we need more models like this to come up and sort of compete, give competition to the other models that are there, so that a good model sort of evolves in the end. I think just speaking of competition, given that there's so large players in this space, right? How should companies who are sort of young think about growing? Can any more new unicorns be created in this space? Because there's a lot of consolidation that is happening, as we've seen, right? And I just want to get your views, given that, for example, Whitehat chose to get acquired by Byju's versus even Shrey, in your case, you chose to partner with an academy very early in your journey. Just want to get your thoughts in that space, why you sort of did that versus, say, maybe doing something else. And maybe on the broader point is, what should other emerging entrepreneurs who might be in the audience think when they're thinking about building another, very large company in the tech space?
Maybe I'll start.
Please.
Yeah, so like Shrey mentioned, distribution is a moat. And because a couple of companies have large distribution, first, from my vantage point, it seems difficult to go head on with them and win, because at the end of the day, CAC will be more distributed and they'll capture that market. And of course, it was not 2 years back, 3 years back. Over time, it's getting stronger as the two companies are getting larger. So in my mind, if I was an entrepreneur, if I was advising an entrepreneur, I would recommend not going head on. That does not mean new companies will not get created. A lot of new companies will get created when you enter with a very, very narrow, very, very sharp wedge. So if you think about it, Whitehat entered with a very sharp wedge. When they started, the space was not talked about. No one knew about the market. It was considered a small market. You come in and you just get in and win that market. Similarly, there are many, many open problems out there, and new companies can get created. and other companies are also going after a very narrow wedge. It did not seem obvious that large companies would do it, and over time Teachment becomes larger, and then becomes it's a way to enter in the market. In my mind, lots of such companies will get created, but I would advise entrepreneurs to not go head on, and because it's just very difficult to fight the money game and the distribution game in that segment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to, I think, broadly aligned with Pratik, I think, so like my advice would have also been the same, but just to add to it like another color, right? Like if you look at China's ecosystem versus our ecosystem, especially in compared to EdTech, right? You will see, like, for example, a lot of, say, if I'll talk about Teachment, like a lot of these teacher-led models are now coming in, which did not exist, say, for example, 2-3 years back, right? Now you can talk about, there are certain other types of models which have also not yet even touched India. And I think it's not to say that it will exactly happen that way, but I think the market is very, very, very large, right? If you think about it, like what probably online education would not even be 5% of the overall chunk, right? So I think that's another question. But I think just to answer, like just one point which I found very interesting in what Pratik was saying, right? That don't go head on. So think of it like this, right? Like let's say you talk about a tuition, right? Across India, you have so many tuition centers, but there is no brand, right? So the whole point is that if you will go and you will do something sort of differentiated, do the same thing, thinking that your product quality is going to be better, you're not going to be able to do that because it's a low barrier to entry business. Anybody can set up a shop and say, I am teaching, right? And as you rightly said, right, when you go and talk to parents, it all feels like the same because you can write the same thing, right? And I think the problem is not really whether your product is amazing or not. The problem is that the cost of getting a parent to try that product is so high that you will not be able to grow. So I think from that perspective, I would urge entrepreneurs to think about those sleek corners. So for example, you think about global markets, you think about pre-K, a lot of these markets are yet untouched, have a great possibility of distribution being built there at very low cost. And you can, and again, the point is that when I see the space, maybe say after 7-8 years, it could be that there are two behemoths with, say 15 billion, 20 billion plus kind of valuations, but then there are other, say 3, 4, 5 sort of unicorns in the space, right? Who have these smaller chunks, right? I think that's similar trend you would also seen in e-commerce when you see 2014 to 16 time through which, say, everybody took, say, for example, Jabong, Myntra, every smaller section of the thing, right? So, which is again similar to what White Hat did in coding. So I think there are sort of lot of analogies to kind of, or corollaries across these segments also. Yeah.
Got it. No, I think it's a very typical military strategy, right? You go and establish a beachhead and then you sort of expand from there. So it sounds very similar to that. Just picking up on what you said, Shrey, in terms of international markets, right? There's a lot of talk around India being this being the next SaaS. That India can export a lot of edtech. I recently was on another panel where I heard that Byju's is doing over 100 million in US, and even significant percentage of companies like White Hat's revenue is from the US. I just want to get your thoughts on Bill. How are there legs to this story? Can this happen? Because there's the supply of teachers in India is very different. I'm not sure if teachers can sort of be able to teach students from different countries. There are many pros and cons around it. Just want to get your thoughts on, will we see more export-led businesses from India in the edtech space? Maybe Pratik, I'll start with you or Shrey.
You can go ahead. Like I'll add on to it.
Okay. So first of all, I think White Hat revenue, some part of it coming from US is right. In fact, I would argue there are other companies as well which are doing this very well. Like one of our portfolio companies, Quizzes, just a small 30-member team sitting out of Bangalore, has more than 70% of schools in US using them every month, and it's growing like a wildfire. Another company called Splash Math, very very under the radar company, built a great product and scaled in US. I think lots of interesting companies are being created from India for US consumption. In my mind, it's not only education really. It is happening across the gamut of companies, and it's an exciting time to do that. So I would say that it's not that it is not happening, and it's not only education. There's a lot of opportunity to build and sell education products globally. The only counter argument I would have there is that unlike in other categories where US seems like a richer market, it's possible that India is a richer market in education, because fundamentally the public infrastructure in US is so good that people don't have habit of spending as much in education as people have in India. So the value prop in US has to be very different. Unlike in India, where all parents force their kids to learn more, study more, and spend more money. In US, people like don't work hard enough, don't work hard, enjoy your life. That is more important. So the value prop has to be very different, and people need to think about it differently. But across the gamut of verticals, I would think that lots of companies will get created from India for US market now, given our product quality has improved and our learning of the ecosystem has improved.
I just add on to this, right? So I think if and I've given a fair deal of thought to this question, particularly because right now we're going international, right? So I mean, it kind of falls right. If I'll just tell you how I am thinking about it, right? So I think, in my view, I think the world will kind of get divided into developed and developing countries, right? I think you have to, and it is already divided, right? I mean, you see different segments. So you see LATAM, you see, where you have Brazil, Mexico, you have Indonesia, you have Southeast Asia, which is another interesting segment. You have Middle East and, your North African regions, right? I think, of course, US is a market, but as Pratik rightly pointed out, right, that there are a lot of, it's not a fundamentally or an inherently high intent market, right? Where does high intent, etc., come from? It's a socioeconomic problem, right? Like if you are living in a culture where resources are tough, you are going to have an economy where people are really going to go after education, right? Why do people value education in India? Why do people value education in China, right? So I think that the same inherent socioeconomic concept is probably yet to be applied to the entire world, right? Now you look at Indonesia. Indonesia is a very interesting market because you see a lot of super apps come there, right? So you see Gojek, which has done really well. You have Ruang Guru, which is doing so much there in terms of education, right? So I think Indonesian EdTech particularly, I would say, I'm not talking about other segments here, but I think, for example, like countries like Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, they're fairly developed in terms of EdTech also. It's not like that there are not entrepreneurs who are not starting companies in those segments also. So for example, but I think the advantage that India has of at this moment is that it's probably like a year or two ahead in terms of that ecosystem, right? Probably what, say, Byju's and Unacademy were where like 2 years back is where the startup ecosystem is in a lot of these countries today, right? So I think I see that as a major layer for India to contribute and actually become that exporter, right? So I would sort of segment and dice it across which countries, why is the socioeconomic condition the same? Are people conducive to international solutions? So for example, when it comes to White Hat, right? Like coding is something that Indians are respected for, right? So your teacher supply works everywhere, right? Now, is that something that you will be able to do across? Very, very large companies in education have been built like checks on these. You look at Infosys, you look at TCS of the world, right? Like what is it, right? You have cost arbitrage, you have lower supply here, you have higher price capability there, right? I think that's what checks did. So I think something similar can be done from India. Perhaps, yes.
Yeah, I think in fact the first acquisition from India, Tutor Vista, was a similar arbitrage, leveraging the arbitrage between India and US.
Yeah, I think just to add to that,
going to Southeast Asia.
So yeah, sorry, my connection broke a bit. Didn't hear that question.
Saying many plans of going international.
Yeah, still couldn't hear that question. Yeah, so broadly, Kunal, I think just to add on to Shrey, right? This is one concept where the signals for this or the proof of this has always existed, right? So if you look back at college, right, when we were in campus, by the time we were leaving, there would always be that one odd guy in your wing or someone in your hostel who's teaching some student in Kuwait or who's teaching a student in US and earning, let's say, $15-20 an hour for that, right? So this concept of Indian teachers teaching students abroad has always been there because of the cost arbitrage that Shrey mentioned, right? There is a lot of supply. Not saying that there is not enough demand in India. In fact, the demand supply is still imbalanced in India. There is a lot of demand, but quality supply is low. But there is lower, but a demand that has much higher capacity to pay in the US, right? So if we talk about teachment right now, we are only available in India, but we are getting a lot of inbound demand from our teachers that I have students in Middle East that I want to teach, and then I have to take a separate batch for them on Zoom because you're not available there, right? Or I have a certain student in US for whom I need to conduct a class. So there is already a demand from Indian teachers that the platform needs to be opened up because so that they can address students from there, right? So yeah, just adding that.
Got it. Got it. I think maybe I have a last question, and then maybe we'll open up to the audience for questions. Everyone, please type in your questions, and then just we'll pick up some of those. I think my last question is, Prateek, you mentioned that you have to pick these small niches and then sort of establish a beachhead there. So what next, right? K-12 is sort of more or less taken. Extracurriculars also more or less, it's out there. What are these white spaces that you see that maybe you entrepreneurs to think of going forward in the edtech market?
So Kunal, I often say that like whatever answer I'll give, it will almost surely be wrong because entrepreneurs will come up with an answer that I cannot imagine, and that's where exciting companies will get created. And I could never have imagined that coding would be a beachhead to a largest company, right? So it's I'll definitely not have a conclusive answer. However, the way when I think and introspect that which are the open spaces which are up for grabs, I think post college there are not enough learning opportunities. So grad and great learning have done a good job in some categories, but largely there is a lot of open space in my mind to build companies there. So people like you and me should be learning how to be better communicators, or how to negotiate better, and how to communicate. There are lots of, and how to be better product managers, how to be better entrepreneurs, and so on. And none of those courses exist. So one is learning beyond college, which is totally left open. The second I sometimes think is that is left open is like Shay mentioned, preschool category. Of course, it will not be learning; it will be something else. But lots of open space there where perhaps companies could be created. The third is the approach. So I sometimes think that we do not really have a social learning company yet. We do not have a company where people are learning from each other. It's almost like a game, something like that could exist, and it will all be orthogonal to Byju's and an academy, and not really directly competing. So in my mind, a lot of these open spaces exist. And of course, selling from India to global markets, lots of opportunities. So these are all open spaces. But I'm sure if I watch this after 5-6 years, I'll think of myself as stupid. But and because something else would have been created.
No, that's true. You should never take a VC's word for what entrepreneurs should be doing. Sri, Mihir, any thoughts on this? What are you guys thinking in terms of next? Maybe you don't want to share all your ideas, but if any pointers to upcoming entrepreneurs will be very useful.
Yeah, maybe I'll start. I think the space is quite wide, Kunal. So when we look at EdTech as such, typically the lens is to look at supplementary education, right? But there are so many ways to look at education. So for example, school education, college education yet to be disrupted, right? So many challenges there, virtually unchanged. The way we looked at it, right? So for example, the lenses that we took was, let's look at infra, right? Let's look at tech. So that was a lens, which was a new lens to look at, and we kind of discovered an opportunity that was just there, yet to be touched. Another lens, for example, we took was that everyone is thinking from the perspective of students. Let's think from the perspective of teachers, right? This is a very large SMB industry in some form that is yet to see any kind of technology penetration, right? Surprising to see how education is still happening the way it was largely happening in schools when we were there 10, 11 years back, right? So there are so many lenses to take it, right? And whichever lens you take, you will find opportunities to tackle there.
Yeah, I think they've pretty much covered a lot of spaces. So I'll be probably out of what I want to say here, but just I'll add like one simple thing, right? So do you think that e-commerce is over today? Like, I'll ask that question, right? And if the answer is no, then I think in edtech, you can say you will come to that question after maybe say 7-8 years, right? So, and in my mind, so e-commerce is not over, by the way, like because there's so much innovation yet to be done there, right? So I think from that perspective, how deep it is probably beyond our imagination, kind of deep. I'll just give you an example of a company called Squirrel AI in China, right? Like, now you look at that model, what do? They essentially have so they open like physical centers. So you have like, you go to like a center which has like thousands of these computers, students sit in front of them, and there are hardly 2 or 3 teachers in the entire center. The computer takes care of the entire education of the child, right? Now, because it's AI in education. Now, if you think about from that spectrum, right, and if you think it from a socio-economic perspective, at every stage you will find a large enough set of users who are willing to pay more from where they are right now in that strata, right? And I think from that perspective, I think there are, while Prateek spoke of so many different angles like pre-K, I mean, I all agree with those spaces, right? I also particularly think coding right after college, that is a space which I think is yet to see like a very, very large unicorn, etc. So I think there are these pockets, but I think in terms of depth also, I think it's very exciting. And I think Mihir already touched upon formal education. Probably the way to AI in education is through formal education. We don't know that, right? But India will come to that to that question, and maybe sooner, because I think and I'm just purely saying this because I feel that the entrepreneurial talent in edtech has improved massively over the last 1 to 2 years, right? So I think that's why I'm more confident that those kind of spaces will also be targeted. I think that's why I'm here. Yeah.
Excellent. No, I think we hope to see more entrepreneurs in this space. Definitely. Can you just take a couple of audience questions? I think Raz has a question on can edtech companies monetize via SaaS? SaaS is typically not seen as a very preferred model of monetization, especially if you're selling to schools or even if you're selling to SMBs or mid market, right? And so what are your views on it? What should the monetization model be going forward? And maybe it sort of kind of relates to Teachment as well, because your solution you could sell as a SaaS, but I don't know what you are thinking in terms of how you will monetize. Will it be a hybrid model of marketplace plus SaaS? Any views?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that, it needs to be figured out, right? Because it's very early, right? So you are what we are doing is kind of like fundamental category creation, right? So this entire concept that there is one application that you can just download and that kind of takes care of digitizing your end-to-end teaching business. That's a concept that hasn't existed, right? So we are still in that phase that category is getting created. But to answer that, see, I think SaaS for education is something that has been proven out to monetize. So if you talk about, for example, players in the US, right? So players like Teachable, Thinkific, Podia, etc., they are now taking up as much as 10% take on whatever volume is flowing through them, right? Purely from SaaS enablement. If you look at players in China, there are players who are just providing a video solution like a Zoom for education solution and taking away very big. Teachers are actually paying a bomb to conduct classes on those solutions because the experience is so different, right? As a teacher, if you are teaching on that solution versus you are teaching on Zoom, your I would say your attraction toward the students goes up by a big difference, right? So in China, it has been proven out, right? So these players are actually taking up 5 to 6% of whatever the teacher is earning purely by giving a Zoom for kind of a solution, right? So for India, what will work, what will not work is something to figure out, right? But what we believe is that ultimately, if you do fundamental value creation, if you are becoming an indisposable part of any business, if you are becoming an indisposable part, then you will figure out ways to capture value.
Absolutely. I think, and especially it's important to be patient, especially when you're creating a category, right? Like in your case. Prateek, I'm also curious to hear your views, given that Nexus is a big SaaS investor as well. What is your view in terms of can edtech monetize via SaaS, or or is there any other? How do you think about it? Should there be other ways to monetize as well?
So taking a step back, I think for most SaaS businesses, if I had to make a generic statement, I would say that India market is not as mature to ask for big bucks. We can build a sustainable real business, but scalable business. For most verticals, I have some questions. And that's true for education as well. Over time, this will change. So 5, 7, 10 years from now, this might be different. However, I'm more bullish on other ways to monetize these SaaS businesses in India. So if you look at Shopify model, majority of the money that they make is not from the SaaS business really. It's really from the revenue share or from the money that the sellers are making. Can you do that in India for different businesses? Yes. Can you build SaaS-enabled marketplaces? So you start with a SaaS business where you're asking for some small amounts of money, but over time, can you empower the demand and supply to be connected because you have the data point, and then capture the payment flow and take a cut in that? Maybe yes, and that could be a large business. Can you provide services on top of the money flow that is happening? Maybe can you provide financial services? Can you provide escrow services? Can you make money because of that? Maybe yes. Can you help people so you are building a SaaS business, but can you help the supplier get access to content or access to demand, and can you make money of that? Maybe yes. So a lot of these, so the entry point is SaaS, but monetization might not be SaaS enabled, and I'm sure lots of iterations would happen across all SaaS businesses there, and Mihir is one of the pioneers there, so I'm sure he's iterating there. But in my mind, SaaS revenue model is not the right revenue model today. It will happen 5 to 10 years from now. But there are other revenue models which I am bullish on. So as an investor, I would not worry about it as much.
Got it. No, I totally agree with that. I think another question we have is related to Pratik, what you mentioned, as an upcoming white space in terms of skill development. India has so many graduates graduating every year, and a lot of them are considered unemployable. So, can this ever get to a manufacturing sector as well, where we sort of start scaling, and not just manufacturing? There's so many other vocational things kids can do that is not necessarily coding. What are your views on that space? I'm sure large companies can be built on that space, but it's taken a lot of time for this space to come up. For example, even ISAs, right? ISAs were deemed to be the future, but it's not also played out as good as everyone expected. Just want to get your views of the panel's views on this question.
Maybe I'll start and then let Shrey and Mihir add. As I said, we are just scratching the surface. I genuinely don't think we are solving the deep problem that there are so many graduates out there, and most of them in true sense are unemployable. So most of the companies, and we are investors in Newton School, which is doing very well and solving the problem on the ground, where they are working with kids and teaching them coding and then getting them praised. And we hear heartwarming stories often that the son of a auto driver got praised for a 6 lakh rupee job, and that changes their life, and auto driver was not making any money during COVID times and so on. So some fundamental impact is happening on the ground, but it is more related to, as I mentioned earlier, accessibility and affordability. But are we changing the fundamental problem? Are we solving the fundamental problem or changing the fundamental infrastructure problem in the country? No. The reality is 6.5 million students are graduating every year, and we don't have as many jobs. Can you skill them and magically change something? No. Like as an economy, we are. In my mind, this is the biggest problem we have. That most of our graduates are unemployable because of unavailability of job and poor quality of education. You can solve it a bit, where you can get some of them to
right? But the inherent aim there is to earn more, right? Now, when it's like manufacturing, etc., you would not find that kind of rigor, right? And I think it's not fundamentally something that probably what Pratik was, I mean, if you are going into the supplemental education, right, it has to be a drive from the consumer. There has to be a demand that, you know, can be captured and say that, okay, yeah, now I can be there, right? Otherwise, it is something that ends up being, should end up being on the side of more like a B2B play, right? And typically those markets, etc., essentially have not really scaled too much because of accessibility or, you know, knowing the right people, right? Because it's a very connection-led market, so as to some sense, and people will find whatever they need. Say in terms of like, let's say if I am a company and I'm trying to find something to like I want to upskill some of my people, there are a lot of agencies and there is a lot of, you know, human capital that exists which is already serving that need, right? So I think that demand also has to come finally to be able to, you know, actually do those you know, get into those segments. And
you make a very interesting point, Sri, that in fact there are two problems, right? One is a 0 to 1 problem of people who are not skilled at all and they need to be skilled to get to that 7-8 lakh CTC. And then there are people who are at 7-8 want to get to 15, and that jump from 7 to 8 to 15 probably doesn't exist in manufacturing. But maybe the 0 to 1 where people, you know, absolutely have no skills of operating a lathe machine, if we teach them how to operate a lathe and a CNC, maybe they'll get a job and, you know, they'll be better. But a very interesting
you can look at
point.
it from let's say the perspective of a founder as well, right? For a founder to spend time on cracking this problem, this will not be a simple problem to solve, right? First of all, so for a founder to spend time in solving this problem, it needs to be a big enough market, right? And given the demand, right? So for example, the scalable demand of let's say preparing graduates for operating a CNC lathe machine, right? How big will that market be? You'll have to go in a lot of depth just to crack that problem statement. So I think it's like Shrey said, right? Pretty much demand driven. If the demand is there, then the industry will find a way to solve it. But right now, that demand maybe is not there at all to a very large extent.
Got it. I think Abbas has a question on, you know, is STEM education and robotics will it see as much as growth as it has seen in the US?
Maybe I'll take. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I think we value STEM education much more than folks in US. Um, we respect that much more than folks in US. And I think the classic example I give is that in Friends, Ross was considered as a loser in some sense. And that's the mindset they have, that they actually don't respect STEM education as much as we do. So the mass market India wants to do this more, and hence market here is larger than that in US. People don't want to do extra things in US as much, while people want to do extra things here. So market is larger here in my mind.
No, that's definitely true. You know, India, the appetite for STEM education is much more. No, I mean, robotics is also, I'm not sure about robotics. You know, robotics is slightly more hands-on. You know, distribution is very hard to build. But from a STEM education perspective, I think it's a very large market. You know, if the audience please feel to drop in questions. I think until the questions come in, I have one last question. You know, there's a lot of disparity in the education market right now. The earlier it has become the have versus the people who have devices versus people who do not have devices, right? And while smartphone penetration is increasing, many families just have one smartphone, right? And it's there are multiple kids. So this digital divide is also sort of creating inhibition among people, or creating barriers for people to access education, the revolution that is happening, right? So any thoughts on that, how and maybe a government has to play a big role there in sort of bridging this divide. What are your thoughts on this space, and how we can solve this problem so education ultimately reaches to every single kid in the country?
Sorry, Pratik, go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, I think again, short term these things look like a problem, but long term these things will be solved. Over time, price of hardware is decreasing, cost of internet is decreasing. So over time, understandably, everyone will have access. And in fact, I would argue it's a chicken egg problem, right? Why should I invest money on hardware and internet till the time I don't know what is the outcome of that? With the availability of services, which will change people's lives, people will invest in this more, and the flywheel will be better. So in my mind, these things seem like problem in 1, 2, 3 years, but in the larger scheme of things, we are in the right direction. I don't worry about it as much.
Got it. No, that's a very interesting perspective. I never thought of it as a chicken and egg problem. That if you have more services, people will be compelled to buy smartphones.
Yeah. So yeah, my thought process there as well is similar, Kunal. See, ultimately the infra problem will eventually get solved, right? So wherever, let's say, there is no access 3 years down the line, wherever there is no access for a smartphone, or let's say a phone that can support, let's say, EdTech, that's a different problem to solve. That's maybe like a more general poverty macro problem to solve, right? But largely the access problem will be solved. Right now, for example, on our platform, the biggest challenge is students don't have good internet connections, right? The experience is kind of bottlenecked by the internet connections that students have. But this should not be a big issue, let's say 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line. So the biggest hurdle of access right now, at least on the platform right now, is not smartphones, but internet connectivity. And also, see, traditionally, the edtech models that have operated in India have been not affordable to everyone, right? So not everyone can kind of use the paid offerings for some of the large edtech players that are out there. But just to give you an example, right? Teacher-led models create very unique propositions for students. Right now on Teachment, there would be a class where a teacher is charging, let's say, 5,000 rupees a month, but there will also be a class where a teacher charges, let's say, just 100 rupees a month, right? And teaches 1,000 students on the platform, and it makes sense for the teacher, it makes sense for the students as well. There might be a teacher that is kind of, let's say, lots of charity classes happen on the platform. So teachers will be taking 3 batches for students who can afford it, and 1 batch for free for students who just want to join. So this, because for example, when you give the power to the teachers to charge the way they want to, then you kind of create an ecosystem where there is something for everyone, right? There is a teacher that will be always be affordable for some student. So that's how also that access part gets solved to a very large extent.
No, thanks for Mihi for taking the affordability issue as well. I think that's also important to look at, and hopefully models like yours solve that one. Maybe one last question we'll take from the audience, and then we're already at time 6:15. I think Divyanshi has a question on the extracurricular education potential in India and globally. Sri, maybe you want to take that?
I'll take that up. I'm hoping that when you mean extracurricular, you mean things like, for example, beyond every skill, like say coding, for that matter, is extracurricular. What we are doing is, for that matter, extracurricular. Then, for example, so at least I can, and I think I think another player in this market is Kite, right? Who particularly focuses on hobby and extracurricular market. So I think the way that I would see it as that, see, a parent's wallet is kind of sort of limited, right? I mean, they would want to spend a limited amount after a point of time on, say, extracurriculars, right? And I think the way that I kind of look at, I think there the inherent idea or why a parent invests is either, so you're not really competing. Okay, let me take a step back, right? So if you think that you're competing with education products only in that market, that's wrong. Because, for example, a child also spends time on Amazon Prime. Let's say, they're watching Prime Video, they're watching Hotstar. So from a parent's mindset, right, why they are going for these learn and play solutions is that you're fundamentally saying that, hey, okay, my child will be occupied and will be doing something more value productive, right, which they find fun, right, and not just say watch TV, etc. So in my mind, the potential is kind of not fully tapped right now, because you will see a lot of people, the more and more sort of categories that you build into this, right? So coding, you saw one, right? You have communication, you have, say, even math also. How do you want to, say, learn more? Right now, these 3 are somewhat fundamental categories where parents feel that, okay, this will also help my kid in extracurriculars as well as help my kid in, school exams and, better sort of prospects in terms of skills later on. So there are certain fundamental extracurricular skills that a parent feels that, I should have my child, and probably if it is not there now, it will become like a trend after 2-3 years. And then there would be some other, these side extracurricular hobbies. For example, you have art, you have, say, music, you have, say, digital design, right? A lot of these kind of things will evolve from a category expansion point of view, right? So I think it will expand into multiple categories. But I think building that brand is super important in this space, that you are holding on to that future school brand, that hey, you are getting everything in one place. Ultimately, that's how I see things evolving in this space. Yeah. And from a global perspective, I think there is definitely a lot of potential. Yeah, we kind of covered this earlier in international markets as well.
Yeah, we did. Thanks, Ray. I think maybe the last question Shiban has for Prateek and me. I'll let Prateek take it first. Now, how do you evaluate pre-revenue ideas, especially the fact that there's so many companies in this space, and or is there a need to have an execution evidence before sort of investors invest in any of these companies?
Yeah. So yeah, I think fair question, and I would say that like in all things, you just need to differentiate. So in copy paste solutions or offering, it just becomes more challenging for you to stand out. And if you have a unique problem or a unique solution and you articulate it, all of us would be excited. For reaching out, it's our job to talk to entrepreneurs like you. Reach out to us on LinkedIn. My email address is prateek@nexusvp.com. Reach out to us there, and I'm sure Kunal is also available. We are happy to chat. But the only advice I would have is go after differentiated solutions and problems, and have a beachhead which you think will help you get into the market better.
Thanks, Prateek. I totally agree with that. Nothing more to add there. Maybe one last question for the today, and then we'll sort of close. I think Sahil has a question again, more on the recruitment space and how that space will evolve. Will it be bundled with the upskilling companies like Upgrad, and maybe companies like even Divyam's company, Newton, etc. also bundle recruitment with their whatever they're teaching? Any thoughts on that, Prateek?
Yeah. So there are two aspects to that problem, right? One is skilling. Well, three aspects. One is assessment, second is skilling, and third is outcome. Outcome might be in the form of job or in the form of promotion. The challenge I have with connecting skilling and outcome is that outcome is very, very difficult. While skilling is perhaps an easier thing to do. So over time, I think both the verticals would be broken. But today, till the time people have established trust, it will be done in a full stack manner. So in my mind, over time, we should see learning, assessment, post learning, and placement as different verticals, and verticalized companies will get created. But over time, of course, that will evolve.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, because not everyone needs upskilling. There's a significant percentage of people who just need to find another job and they don't need upskilling. And for those set of people, which will also be quite large, we need to have these players which are just focused on recruitment and assessment. And then there have to be a set of players who are just going back to the earlier analogy. If you're doing a 0-to-1 skill skill teaching and all, then you need to go full stack. But if you're just someone who wants to just place people who already are at a skill 100, then you don't need to upskill them. There needs to be a player who will just help get them a good job and just smoothen out that process.
I'll just add one line there. I think there's a big opportunity there, because assessment is a big problem. So just by assessment, if you solve assessment problem, then you just solve the recruitment problem there, because people trust that my degree or my certificate is good enough, and that just helps you get placed faster, and then the supply and demand both will be willing to pay you. So I think assessment is a key problem that most people don't talk about.
Exactly. So in fact, Prateek, I was just thinking about this only while you were speaking, right? You were talking about different verticals, but I feel that fundamentally who changes assessment has the power to control supply also later on. Like, I mean, I think that solution, that innovation has to be more assessment led, in my
Agree.
Awesome. No, this is great. Thank you so much, guys. I think I would like to thank Prateek, Shrey, Mihir, all of them to taking time and answering our questions, as well as sharing your thoughts. We would also like to thank Devesh, who's the CEO of IITB Alumni Association, for his support to the Bangalore chapter events. and Smita, of course, who's been the brainchild behind all of these events that the Bangalore chapter is conducting. Thank you so much, Smita, for being persistent and chasing all of us to ensuring that we are doing these events. And of course, a lot of our area and chapter reps who've helped us publicize this event to get an audience. I think today we've had one of the biggest turnouts ever. So thanks everyone on the chapter area reps who might or might not be here. Thank you everyone, and hope to stay in touch and organize more of events like this.
Thank you, Kunal. Thank you, Shrey. Thank you, me. Thank you, Smita. Super.
Thank you, everyone.